says streaming live on Facebook. Should we get started? Good evening. My name is Kent Wong. I'm the director of the UCLA Labor Center. My apologies for the slight delay in tonight's broadcast, but we're very happy to welcome you to this segment of Labor's Voice. This is a production that is held 2 times a month and is co-sponsored by the UCLA Labor Center and the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. Tonight's segment is on driving change in the gig economy. We will be talking about the issue of rideshare drivers, such as Uber and Lyft, who are having a major challenge with regard to the fight for economic justice and worker rights in the face of some of the most wealthy corporations in the gig economy in the country. So please stay tuned for this segment on driving change in the gig economy. And to start off our program, we are very pleased to welcome Kayo with the Los Angeles Community Action Network, and he's also the Minister of Music at the Row Church. Welcome, Kayo.
Hello, I think I'm off mute now. All right, how's everybody? So I'm very grateful to be here, and I thought I would start us off with a familiar tune, but with my own spin on it. So I hope everybody enjoys this. This one's called Bridge Over Troubled Water. When you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I'll dry them all. I'm on your side. When times get rough and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down. Don't trouble the water. Leave it alone. Why don't you let it be? Still waters run deep. Yes, they do. Oh, yeah. When you're down and out, when you're on the street, when evening falls so hard, I'll comfort you. I'll take your part. When darkness falls and pain is all around, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down. I'll lay me down. Oh, I said, don't trouble the water. Leave it alone. Why don't you let it be? Still waters run deep. Yes, they do. Oh, yeah. Don't trouble the water. Leave it alone. Why don't you let waters run deep. Yes, they do. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. When you're down and out, living on the street, when evening falls so hard, I'll comfort you. I'll take your part when darkness falls and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down, yeah, lay me down.
Thank you for that beautiful music, Kayo. And I think that's a very appropriate song, Bridge Over Troubled Water, to capture the current crisis that we face. The first speaker tonight is my good friend and colleague, Tia Koonse, who is with the UCLA Labor Center. And not only has Tia done extraordinary work on the issue of wage theft and minimum wage, but she was also involved in a path-breaking research project on workers in the gig economy, specifically the rideshare economy and rideshare drivers. So welcome, Tia. Tell me a little about the study that was conducted by the UCLA Labor Center on rideshare workers.
I am so happy to do so, Kent. If I can share my screen, that would be great. But if not, I am happy to just share some of the basic findings. First, I want to let you know the lens from which we conducted this study, and that's that at the UCLA Labor Center, we believe that a public university belongs to the public and that we should advance the interests of working people. So our research often challenges precarious work, by which I mean work that's low wage or part-time or informal or temporary or subcontracted or outsourced. And the purpose in our study here was to demonstrate the need for checks and balances to ensure that issues like public safety and working conditions and income security are integrated into the rideshare model, as well as to disrupt the narrative of gig work and to lift up driver stories in the process. But our interest in rideshare started many years ago, and it actually started in 2013. We started to look at the impact Uber and Lyft were having on taxis here in Los Angeles. Remember taxis? We found that between 2013 and 14, when Uber and Lyft began in the city, taxi ridership dropped by almost 20%, a total of 1.4 million trips less than the previous year. And that translated into a loss of revenue and loss of jobs. So we estimated just in that year alone, the county lost 319 jobs and $32 million. And of course, the next year, 2015, the city opened up the airport to Uber and Lyft and rideshare drivers, really not leveling the playing field at all, but letting Uber and Lyft dominate the market. So our research team, which was comprised of students and staff of UCLA Labor Center, conducted 260 surveys, and 8 in-depth interviews. And we recruited drivers through student social networks, approaching drivers at pickup and drop-off TNC locations, through flyers and Facebook posts and ads, and boy, did people want to talk to us. What we found is that despite what the advertising for Uber and Lyft would have you believe about the flexibility of rideshare, drivers are actually full-time. 48% drive more than 35 hours a week, and 60% drive more than 5 days a week. Drivers in our survey have been on the job for 13 months on average, and this is a far cry from the college students or the house spouses looking for extra pocket money that Uber and Lyft would have you believe are their primary drivers. We also found that full-time drivers are older, they're 40, fully half are immigrants, and nearly all support at least one kid in the home. Drivers also depend on Uber and Lyft to live. This is not a pocket money situation for them. 2/3 drive as their main source of income. 1 in 2 say driving is in fact their only job. And with ride-hailing earnings, more than half support another family member. 35% are supporting families with at least one child present. It's across the board. Drivers are also locked into the work, right? So 35% have leased or purchased their cars in order to drive for the TNC. So this is like old-fashioned, crop sharing, or what do you call it? The program where it is you lease the land and you never are going to manage to make enough money to be able to purchase the land or get wages for yourself. This is what the situation is for 35% of the drivers that we surveyed. Also, the majority purchased car accessories like cell phone mounts and mats and seat covers. 78% spent money out of their own pockets on things like water and phone chargers and candy for the customer without getting any reimbursements. 44% reported having difficulty paying for work expenses like gas and insurance and maintenance. You start to put a lot of miles on a car when you're an Uber and Lyft driver, particularly full-time, and of course you need regular maintenance. Given the burden of work-related expenses and unstable income, 55% of drivers would prefer to earn a set hourly wage after expenses. And I'll get to it in a little bit, but drivers really want a lot of the security of being employees. It's also really stressful. Oh, I have more to say, Kent. Shall I stop there?
No, I just wanted to thank you for sharing some of the highlights of the study. But one of the issues that you were just about to get into is the issue of how these drivers are not characterized as workers, but as independent contractors. So could you please explain why is that a significant difference between them being considered workers versus independent contractors?
So maybe listeners or watchers have followed the controversy of Assembly Bill 585, which took effect on January 1st of this year. And what that bill does would make it much, much more difficult for employers to misclassify their workers as independent contractors instead of employees. And the reason that's so crucial is because only employees have the right to minimum wage, meal and rest breaks, overtime, healthcare under the Affordable Care Act, in other words called Obamacare, the right to organize under the National Labor Relations Act without being fired. And in fact, one of the things that we see with misclassification is that workers who do organize to improve their working conditions are regularly retaliated against, so regularly terminated. And we know, in fact, that most workers, when they do take any action, end up experiencing retaliation. If you don't even have any rights under the NLRA because you're classified as an independent contractor, imagine how many experience retaliation. So that classification is really central to whether or not you have rights on the job and whether or not you can support yourself and your family. Uber and Lyft have been misclassifying their drivers as independent contractors since their inception. And the author of AB 5, Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, explicitly enumerated that Uber and Lyft would be covered under AB 5, that their drivers are in fact misclassified because they don't exercise control in the workplace. They're not regularly putting themselves out there as drivers for hire, right? And because the Uber and Lyft controls every aspect of the conditions under which Uber and Lyft drivers work. So what we know about Uber and Lyft drivers is that because they're employees, they should be eligible for health and safety protections, for minimum wage, as I indicated, but also for health insurance. And particularly now under the COVID-19 pandemic, Uber and Lyft drivers have the right and need the right to PPE and to health insurance more than they ever have before. Unfortunately, Uber and Lyft deny that their drivers are in fact employees, refuse to pay minimum wage or extend the duly afforded PPE and health and safety protections that they owe their drivers. And so what we find ourselves now is in this fight for our lives to try to extend and level the playing field, extend the rights that Uber and Lyft drivers are afforded and level the playing field with taxi drivers and with other workers in the transportation industry.
That's great, Tia. Well, thank you so much for sharing that information about the difference between independent contractors and employees and why Uber and Lyft and other corporations are taking advantage of these employees through this mischaracterization as independent contractors. And for people who want to get more information, how can they get a copy of your report?
Please go to UCLA Labor Center's website, which is ucla.labor.edu, and I will put it in the chat for folks.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tia. It's a great report, and I encourage people to please, if you're interested in learning more about the gig economy and the rideshare economy in particular, please check out the report. Next, we're going to turn to a short video on the Mobile Workers Alliance that is being supported by the Service Employees International Union, Local 721. So I hope you enjoy this short 3-minute video. Give us just another minute. We're keying up the video that was produced by the Service Employees International Union, Local 721, on the Mobile Workers Alliance, a novel attempt to organize workers in the rideshare economy.
My name's Kavai Floyd, and we are in San Francisco getting ready to rally against Uber and Lyft for a fair wage. We're assembling to do basically a drive-in on Uber Capital with their headquarters, and we are going to make our presence known on how happy we are, basically making less than minimum wage.
Right now we're going to the headquarters in Uber, and after Uber, we're going to go to Sacramento.
A mile doesn't pay the bills, doesn't pay a car payment, doesn't cover insurance. We need to be seen and heard so we can get everything that we need under Uber and Lyft. So that way we can live, we can support our families. AB5 and the union.
He manejado 5 años. Es importante la caravana, estamos aquí porque queremos más beneficios y la unión. Pienso que es muy importante porque es la única forma de que consigamos algún tipo de apoyo por parte de autoridades y por parte de Uber.
I'm here because where I come from, gig is another word for job. That means you deserve a minimum wage. That means you deserve protections from workplace and sexual harassment. That means you deserve overtime protections. And yes, that means you deserve a union. Do we want a better future for everybody working, whether it is full-time in a traditional company or not? Will we stand up for that? I think the answer is yes. There are unions standing with you. There are customers standing with you. We support you. We are with you, and we thank you for raising your voices today.
That's a pretty inspiring video by the Mobile Workers Alliance, and it's a reflection of the organizing that is taking place among Lyft, Uber, and other rideshare drivers all across the country, fighting for better wages, better working conditions, and against the mischaracterization of their jobs as independent contractors. With us tonight is Felipe Caceres, who is a coordinator with the Service Employees International Union, Local 721. So welcome, Felipe, and tell me, why is SEIU 721 involved in this particular campaign?
Oh, thank you, Kent. SEIU Local 721 represents 98,000 members, making it the largest public sector union in Southern California. And so we've been an innovator in a lot of campaigns like this, similar to the Fight for 15 and the Mobile Workers Alliance, in organizing We have a long history, including the Justice for Janitors campaign here in Los Angeles 30 years ago. And those efforts continue with the Mobile Workers Alliance and the Fight for 15. Our local continues to organize with low-wage workers. And while the gig economy has often touted as the future of work, our union is committed to ensuring that the future is one that uplifts and empowers working people. Whether they consider themselves a gig or not, working people deserve a minimum wage and dignity on the job.
Thanks so much, Felipe. So what's fascinating is that SEIU 7-1 is predominantly a public sector union, but you've also been involved in some landmark organizing involving fast food workers for the Fight for 15, as well as for rideshare workers. So tell me why a public sector union is engaged in these other worker fights.
So SEIU was a key driver for the Fight for 15 organizing on the West Coast, beginning first in Los Angeles with a fast food strike in 2013, and then a fast food fast in order to pass a minimum wage here in Los Angeles. Our members joined courageous fast food workers in an unprecedented wave of worker organizing in order to even pass a $15 minimum wage in California. The tireless efforts of fast food workers and the local members at SEIU Local 721, including members from small cities across Southern California, engaged in low-wage worker organizing, has been shown to grow the labor movement. And our continued support of groups like the Mobile Workers Alliance will show that workers deserve dignity and a minimum wage all across the country, including public and private sector workers.
Well, thanks so much for your work, Felipe, on this front. And it's inspiring for us to see a robust, dynamic union like SEIU that already has strong union density in the public sector, embracing a broader social justice vision to organizing non-organized workers in the private sector, like fast food workers and like workers in the gig economy and in the rideshare economy. Joining us is one of the activists who's been working with the Mobile Workers Alliance, and that is Jerome Gage. So welcome, Jerome, and tell me a little more about what is the Mobile Workers Alliance?
Oh, well, the Mobile Workers Alliance is a driver-led coalition of drivers fighting for basic working conditions and a union for gig workers like myself. It's been pretty exciting being with them, and I've seen the miraculous amount of progress and victories as they've achieved for gig workers, and I'm excited to work with them more in the future.
That's great. So tell me a little more, Jerome, about what it is like to be a rideshare worker, and how long have you been doing it, and what are the conditions that drivers face?
Well, I started about 5 years ago. I've driven for both Uber and Lyft, but I started driving full time just for Lyft back in 2018, and the honeymoon phase of the flexibility ended really quickly when I realized that in order to make ends meet, to pay the bills I needed to pay, to maintain the car, insurance, and all these things like that, I really needed to work more and more and more. And the flexibility was a lie as well, because I realized there were just certain hours out of the day where you couldn't even make a minimum wage. If you're working 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., you're not going to be making as much or as reliably as, working during peak rush hour. So I found myself effectively working sort of a split shift, 4 hours in the morning and then 4 hours when jobs let out at 5 p.m. And it was consistent. There was no flexibility. If I deviated from that schedule, it would hurt. It would hurt a lot in my paycheck. And the COVID crisis has really amplified all of these terrible scenarios that Uber and Lyft have put their drivers in, and it's been really tough. I know a lot of drivers like myself, we're worried because we're working through these conditions because we have to work. We have no health insurance because the companies don't provide it to us, and because they refuse to comply with AB5 and make us employees, we don't even have unemployment. So they're not giving overwage information to the state in order to ensure that we have options in case we get sick. So, Uber and Lyft have created this nightmare scenario where, a driver who is sick or feels sick, has no choice but to work to feed their family.
I mean, what's outrageous is that we have some of the wealthiest corporations, some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet who come out of these tech industries, and yet the workers who are producing that wealth are being treated so poorly. So I'm glad you raised this issue of the COVID-19 crisis, because that must be a horrible dilemma for drivers to decide whether they want to go to work and risk exposure and risk their lives versus whether they want to continue to make a paycheck and continue to put food on the table. So tell me about that dilemma that some of the rideshare workers are facing today.
Well, yeah, it's just as you said, it's a nightmare scenario, and I'm personally afraid every single time I go out and work that I'm going to contract the virus and give it to my friends or family, and potentially even worse, spread it to other passengers. Now, a driver's concern isn't just to drive safely; it's also to keep a safe environment for the passengers in the car. Because that's, we want to be welcoming. We want this industry to thrive, and we know that we're an important part of it. Unfortunately, Uber and Lyft have not been giving us the necessary support to achieve those goals. A few months ago, there was something called the mayor in LA. It was called the Mayor's Worker Protection Order, where it was required that all businesses that were open had to provide their employees with protective equipment. And Uber and Lyft didn't follow the order. They offered us too little, too late. Once they started handing out, you have to drive to the hub and actually manually pick it up. What they offered us would only last a few days. And frankly, given the level of seriousness of this crisis, we couldn't skimp on it. We really needed to use it for every single trip to keep our car clean. So we ended up needing to purchase these things ourselves, not only after they started handing out the little that they did, but even before this when they weren't giving us anything. And that's cutting into our wages. And so, drivers like myself, we're incredibly dedicated to ensure that passengers are safe, and we aren't becoming a carrier, of the disease, spreading it throughout California. We want to help flatten the curve, but we need Uber and Lyft to step up their game and protect their employees in order to really make that happen.
Well, that's really such an important message that here, when these corporations are making huge profits off the backs of workers, that they're not even providing the basic PPE and safety measures that are needed for their workers. My final question, Jerome, addresses the amazing images we just saw in that video from the Mobile Workers Alliance. And what are you doing in terms of organizing these workers who are working in cars all over the city, all over the state? But how is the organizing taking place to build power for rideshare workers?
Well, Mobile Workers Alliance has been the main organizing body for myself and thousands of drivers and other gig workers, including both food delivery and, of course, ride sharing. Most recently, we led a 200-car caravan through LAX and a massive driver action at the Uber CEO's home in San Francisco. And much before that, organizing with the Mobile Workers Alliance, we were critical in the passage of Assembly Bill 5, AB 5, last year. It was a key step toward ending the misclassification of independent contractors versus employees in the gig economy. And frankly, it made it way simpler for someone without a law degree to understand where that line is drawn and where they fit, of course. To communicate the need for and support of AB 5, we also visited, Uber headquarters, traveled to Sacramento to speak to lawmakers, and led a historic 3-day, 1,000-mile caravan all the way up to the top of the state and down again to ensure AB 5's passage. That's sort of what you saw in the video before. And we won. We won. AB 5 is law. And it's not our only victory in 2019, but arguably our biggest. But the fight's not over. Drivers have been calling on state lawmakers to actually enforce AB 5 and hold Uber, Lyft, and the other gig economy companies accountable. So I was so exhilarated when the Attorney General just last week announced that they would be seeking an immediate preliminary injunction against the companies to put a halt to their misclassification of workers. Our plans for the immediate future include efforts to beat back Uber and Lyft at the ballot box. They put a deceptive ballot measure on the ballot in November. That ballot measure, if it becomes law, rolls back all the victories and protections we've been able to secure for our gig workers. And it makes them exempt from AB 5 and future legislation that could help workers. You know, who does that? Who tries to make themselves exempt from the law? So yeah, we're pretty upset about that. Regardless though, we've been up to some pretty exciting things, and you can expect to see much more from us in our drive for change.
Well, thank you so much, Jerome, for your extraordinary work, and congratulations to the Mobile Workers Alliance for the organizing that you are doing on the front lines. And it truly is a David versus Goliath story, where you have these massive tech corporations who are making huge profits, and yet they're investing millions and millions to try to undo AB 5. I wanted to show now a short 30-second video, which is being aired throughout California, to talk about this very mean-spirited, corporate-backed initiative to try to undo AB 5. So I hope we can share a 30-second video with all of you.
Some politicians are putting all that at risk.
Whoa, slam the brakes on that. Companies like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash have been breaking state employment laws for years. Now these multi-billion-dollar companies airing misleading ads for a deceptive ballot proposition that denies drivers their rights. No sick leave, no workers' comp, no unemployment benefits. Slam the brakes on the misleading Uber, Lyft, DoorDash campaign. Vote no on their deceptive ballot proposition.
Thank you so much. And so joining us tonight is Bryan Blum, who's the political director for the California Federation of Labor, representing millions of workers throughout the state of California. So Bryan, I want to know a little more about why the California Labor Federation is so committed to this fight to defend the rights of rideshare drivers in the state of California.
Ken, sure. So, you heard a great setup by Tia and Felipe and Jerome about what happens when these multi-billion-dollar companies misclassify workers and the suffering that they create. Misclassification has been one of the most common ways companies cheat workers out of what they deserve. It's been a blight on workers for several decades, but it's just gotten consistently worse. And the gig economy and the use of apps has just accelerated that race to the bottom of companies trying to get out of their obligations to treat workers fairly and treat them as employees. So, we view this as one of the biggest issues facing workers that there is. And so, this is a fight that's important in California. You've heard several mentions to AB 5. When we passed that last year, that got national attention. We stood firm here in California. We're the largest state in the nation, obviously, and actually home to a lot of these gig companies. So when California stood up and took a stand against the misclassification of workers, that's important not just for the workers here in California that's going to be affected by, but that's something that is actually going to set the tone for the battle against corporations nationally. So we view this as, one of the most important fights we've had in decades because of these reasons.
That's great to hear. And as you said, what happens here in California often sets the pace for policies across the country. So when workers score a victory here in California, workers all across the country benefit because they learn from policy victories, they learn about organizing victories that happen right here in California. But it's interesting that you talked about how widespread this problem of the mischaracterization of workers is, not just in the rideshare economy. So can you talk about how this mischaracterization of independent contractors is used by corporations in other industries as well?
Absolutely. And sort of This first got highlighted with a Supreme Court case that made its way through several court challenges through the years. And it actually was a delivery company that's a competitor, like a competitor of UPS or FedEx. It was a delivery company that was mischaracterizing their workers. So it's an issue that Teamsters and drivers have been facing for decades. But it's a threat that potentially all workers are going to be facing. The gig economy business model is a threat to union jobs and good jobs in every industry. We've seen, whether it's the entertainment industry, whether it's grocery, whether it's home care, transportation, delivery services, healthcare, hotel, hospitality, all of these industries are facing models of the gig economy and app-based ways of hiring workers. So this fight, we're talking about the rideshare companies tonight, but this actually is something that's going to affect all workers. The gig economy, creates an uncompetitive advantage that threatens union and good jobs and good employers. Also threatens things like the building trades and construction workers. There are these app-based services like Handy that threaten to take away union jobs from construction workers. So we're talking about the threat and the blight of the rideshare companies now, but this is a threat to all workers, because we are sort of seeing the gig economy growing and threatening all these other industries. And again, to that point you and I, Kent made, of California setting a model for the nation, if we can rein them in here and stop this gig economization of all the jobs here in California, then we have a chance of actually leading the fight back nationally. However, the reverse is true. If we can't stop the rideshare companies with their attack to create a special exemption for themselves and get themselves out of AB5, that's going to send a model to other corporations in California, and that's going to send a model nationally as well. So this fight over this ballot initiative that Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash have put on the ballot to exempt themselves out of AB5, all the other employers in California are looking at it, and then all the other industries and employers nationally are going to be looking at this fight. So this is a fight that has ramifications certainly for every worker in California, but I would argue even nationally. This is the place where we take our stand, where working people take their stand against the gig economy and the exploitation of workers.
Well, that's heavy, Bryan, that you talked about the widespread impact that this issue is having in so many other industries. And so what they're doing to Lyft and Uber drivers is being done in many, many other workplaces. And so the threat that is posed to those workers is a threat to workers everywhere. And what we see is that these corporations are going to be investing millions and millions of dollars in a campaign of misinformation and deception in order to undo the protections that were fought for and won. So what is the California Labor Federation going to do between now and November to make sure that we can fight back against this corporate campaign to allow them to extract profits at the backs of their workers?
Hey, you're so right, Ken, about the millions and millions of dollars. When they filed this ballot measure last year, the next day they put $110 million into the bank account to run a political campaign. And just think of all the protective gear for employees that they could have given to drivers with that $110 million. Just think of the minimum wages they could have given to drivers with that $110 million. Instead, they're putting it in to run a political campaign. And they are having to spend that amount of money because they know working people and Californians aren't really on their side when they understand the issue. So they're running a very deceptive campaign and spending a ton of money against it. Our challenge is to run a campaign to defeat it. And we have found that if we can talk to voters and explain the facts behind it and let them know the issue and also who's behind this deceptive ballot measure, voters will be on our side. But we start, again, with a bit of a problem because they wrote the initiative. They wrote it in a very deceptive way to exempt themselves out. So a lot of voters that are in the parts of California that should naturally be our base, places where we have union voters, voters of color, younger voters, progressive voters, places like LA, places like the Bay Area, we don't start off with the numbers that we would naturally expect to see. So, I talked about California being ground zero for this national fight. LA's kind of ground zero for this fight in California. One, LA is always big and important in statewide races, but it's so important for this race in particular, because what should be our base voters in LA are being deceived by Uber and Lyft, and it takes a while to explain that to them. But if we can do that, we can win statewide, but we can't do it if we don't run up the margin here in LA. And that requires a campaign working with the LA Fed, working with our community partners, working with allies to get the word out and have these conversations with voters and do some good old-fashioned organizing between now and November to set the record straight and expose Uber and Lyft for what they're trying to do.
Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight, Bryan. We really appreciate the work you do as the political director at the California Labor Federation for putting up the good fight for workers throughout California. And we here in Los Angeles will do what we can to defend and protect AB 5 and the rights that were fought for and won for Uber and Lyft drivers, that they're now trying to spend $110 million in a campaign of lies and deception, basically to strip rights from their workers and to plunge them into poverty. So we're going to now show one more short 30-second clip that we hope that you can share with your friends and family to educate them about this critical issue. Well, sorry about the sound, but there is a soundtrack that goes with that 30-second clip. And we hope that you will be able to share this information with your family members, with your coworkers, with your friends, because we have a ballot initiative with $110 million that's being bankrolled by some of the wealthiest corporations on the planet. And California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And why is it that some of the wealthiest corporations are spending their money to allow them to exploit their workers? Our final speaker this evening is Rosemarie Molina, who is the organizing director for the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. And the LA Fed is doing extraordinary work in feeding the community, in advancing worker organizing, and in fighting for policies that defend the rights of workers. But Rosemarie, can you tell me why the LA Fed is also prioritizing this particular fight for rideshare drivers right here in California and throughout California, right here in Los Angeles and throughout California?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kent. As Bryan said, what happens in LA resonates throughout the state and honestly the entire country. We are the make it or break it for the state. And the reality is that our voter turnout in LA will determine the results for California. So what we do here really matters. And right now we're showing leadership in Los Angeles. We're setting the tone as one of the largest economies in the entire world that minimum standards for workers must be provided in the gig economy.
That's great. And so just tell me a little about, Rosemarie, some of the organizing campaigns that the LA County Fed is involved in right now, because Los Angeles has been such a model for organizing, and not just politics, but organizing resonates here throughout the country. So tell me what the LA Fed is doing to strengthen organizing of workers.
Absolutely. Well, right now around AB 5, we're going to embark on a massive education campaign, not just for the gig economy workers, but for all workers. Everybody needs to know how dangerous this is. And even though this measure is specific to Uber and Lyft, we continue this. and technologies develop. And the honest truth is that tech companies are avoiding their responsibility to provide minimum standards to workers. And apps make it easier for workers to be independent contractors. And if employers find loopholes in the gig economy to cheat workers, they're going to cheat workers and taxpayers in other parts of the economy. And so massive education is what we're doing in collaboration with our partners and with our unions. But we're taking the streets, and it looks a little bit different in COVID, but that's what we're doing, is we're hitting everybody's ear. And we have something for folks to do, actually.
That's great. I wanted to kind of wrap up with that, because one thing that a good organizer does is that they always tell people what the next thing they can do to help create the change that we all want to see. So Rosemarie, can you bring it home to us to tell us what is a call to action for the people that are listening this broadcast? What can they do to support rideshare workers and to push back against corporate abuse?
Absolutely. So we have two choices right now, folks. We can continue to allow tech companies like Uber and DoorDash to lower standards and pocket the money they should be providing for workers for minimum standards, or we can hold them accountable to the promise that a hard day's pay is earned after a hard day's work. And to us, the choice is obvious, and the choice is actually in your hands. And the good news is that this ballot measure that will be determined by LA, you can start now acting on it. And what you can do is you can go to this link right here, and you can take the pledge and share it on your social media, share it with everybody. And I want folks to remember that this is LA, and we don't stand for this shit, folks, right? We are the home for justice for janitors. We are the home of the carwacheros, an industry that people said could never be organized. We're the home of the immigrants' rights movement, and we're the city that pushed for minimum wage that then started a trend across the nation, like Felipe said. So what I'm getting at is LA has never backed down from a fight. And we're going to rise to this challenge. And people clearly haven't studied their history, because they're calling us out right now with a lot of misconception. And you know what? They're going to lose. And I know that we'll defeat them. So people are looking to us right now, and they're looking to you. They don't know my city, but knowing all of you all and knowing our history, I know we're going to win. So please go to this link, get involved, share it with everybody, your mom,
Well, thank you so much, Rose. So I really want to encourage everybody to please
believe me when I say that we're David versus Goliath. I don't think I need to and that, so let's do it.
Okay, thank you so much, Rose. And my apologies for some of the technical difficulties. You know, it's ironic that we're talking about the horrible practices in the tech industries, and we're having technical difficulties ourselves. So, but please log on to the LA County webpage, sign the pledge, get involved, support, gig workers. Let us drive change in the gig economy. So I want to thank our speakers from tonight's program. I want to thank Tia Koonse from the UCLA Labor Center. I want to thank Felipe Caceres from SEIU 7-1. I want to thank Jerome Gage from the MWA that's organizing rideshare drivers, Bryan Blum, the political director of the California State Federation of Labor, and Rosemarie Molina, the organizing director for the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. Please get involved in this fight, and we can win come November. And to close out the evening, I want to once again welcome Kayo to share his beautiful music from LA Can and from the Road Church right here in Los Angeles. So thank you, Kayo.
Absolutely. I want to end with this one because it gives us an action step. Broken down and tired, living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't find the fighter. I see it in you, so we gonna walk it out. Move mountains, we gonna walk it out and And I'll rise up, I'll rise like a day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you. All we need is hope. And for that we've got each other. For that we've got each other. We will rise, we will rise, we will rise. We'll rise, and I'll rise up, rise like a day. We'll rise up, in spite of the ache. We'll rise up and do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, you, you. I'll rise for you. Right on.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your beautiful voice, Kayo. And please sign on again for our next segment of Labor's Voice. Good evening.